everyone. Thank you for coming to my session. So, as it is said here, my the research on which this presentation is based on was titled "Active Learner, Future Leader: A Case Study of the Stimulation and Development of Learner Leadership in a Primary School in Makhanda." So, before I start my presentation, I'd like to introduce myself. So, my name is Zikhona Faku. I am a master's candidate in the Department of Education at Rhodes University. I was born and raised in Makhanda. I then went to Nombulelo Senior Secondary School, where I benefited from a number of community engagement initiatives like Ikamba Youth, Gadra Education, Upstart, and many more. I then later went to Rhodes University and became thank you. I later went to Rhodes University and became an engaged student where I mentored, I tutored, and volunteered in a range of programs. So community engagement is something that is very close to my heart, and I'm basically a product of community engagement myself. So the study on which this presentation is based on looked at the stimulation of learner leadership within primary school learners in a primary school in Makhanda. So basically, this study was part of a multi-case study by the Honors in Education Leadership and Management class. We did a multi-case study, but we individually had individual cases in our different schools. So the different cases were based in and around Eastern Cape, but mine was based in a primary school in Makhanda. So we wanted to look at how leadership within learners could be developed and stimulated. We looked at leadership as decision making. Leadership is the ability to make decisions and to participate in decision making spaces. We wanted to sort of get rid of the idea that leadership is an adult phenomenon, because even in the South African Schools Act, it states that learners can only participate in decision making, like the school governing body, from grade 8 and upwards. So what does this then mean about the decision making or the leadership capacity or ability of primary school learners? Because there's this ability, or there's this idea that primary school learners are not able to make decisions on their own. So my research, my main research aim was to explore learner leadership in primary schools. In a specific primary school in Makhanda. My research had one main research question and four research sub-questions which functioned as context analysis. So in my research, I wanted to find out if learner leadership can be developed in primary schools, and if it can, how can it be developed? My research sub-questions, which functioned as context analysis, are: what are primary school learners' understandings of leadership? What learner leadership opportunities currently exist in primary schools? What participatory activities can be adopted to stimulate and develop learner leadership in primary schools? And lastly, I wanted to find out why learner leadership is important in primary schools. So these sub-questions helped me get an understanding of what was already happening in the primary schools before I could answer the question if learner leadership could be developed in primary schools. So with my methodology, my research was a participatory approach, where I worked with the grade 7 learners as co-researchers. And I used the Lundy model of child participation, which prioritizes space, voice, influence, and audience. My data generation methods were storytelling, photo voice, think, pair, share, and pass the paper. In terms of ethics, I had to consider that these were primary school learners. So I applied for ethics from the Department of Education, and then I wrote, I also applied to work in the schools. I asked for consent from the principals, from the parents, but most importantly, I asked for assent from the learners themselves. We had a box activity where the learners would visibly give assent because they are young and they are minors, they're not able to give consent. Even though their parents had signed the consent forms, I wanted the learners themselves to give assent. So how we would do it is that we would have a box. So if a learner wanted to participate in the research, they'd write their name in a paper and then put it in a box. And throughout the research, assent was something that we prioritized. So if we had an activity or whenever we're going to begin our sessions, we would always have the box so that if the learners felt as though during a certain session they didn't want to participate anymore, they were allowed to withdraw at any moment, then come back at a later moment when they felt like it. So in terms of research findings, my research found that leadership can be developed in primary schools through the co-creation of safe spaces. So to elaborate on this more, my research found that learner leadership can be developed, and learners do take up the leadership role, and they do participate in decision making when they see that their inputs and the things that they have to say in these spaces are valued, and when they see that this is a safe space that that captures their ideas and that their ideas are actually being put into practice, then they start embodying leadership. So I wanted to also look at learners' understandings of leadership. I wanted to know what the learners think about leadership and what their conceptual views or understandings of leadership are. So what I found that was that in the beginning, when my research began, their understandings of leadership were more positional. So when we talk about leadership, they'd talk about political figures like Ramaphosa, they'd bring up kinship and all those positional leadership. But as the research progressed, I found that they associated leadership to be linked to a person's attributes, character, behavior, and actions. They understood a leader to be a certain way, act a certain way, and behave a certain way around others. And some would even say a leader is someone who has these type of attributes, or a leader is someone who behaves a certain way around other people. And even them themselves began seeing themselves as leaders. Here is a quote from from one participant. So the one on top is something that they wrote in the beginning, and then the one in the bottom was another activity that we did towards the end. So in the beginning, their understanding of leadership was that leadership is something like when someone leads something or being in charge of something, like when people lead the church, school, or other places. For example, Ramaphosa is the leader of African National Congress. He is leading ANC, and people follow Ramaphosa's rules because he is the president of SA. What I understand about leadership, I understand that a leader influencing about goals, and a leader doesn't leave people in the middle with troubles. And a leader is an influencer with goals and improvements for people. So towards the end of the research, they began to understand that leadership is about influencing. Leadership is about being goal-orientated. It's not only about being in a position of power. So even if you are not in a position, you can still be a leader as long as you are influencing and you are able to lead those around you to the right place. So the leadership opportunities that exist in the school, I found that the opportunities that exist are class manager, class captain, head girl, sports captain, head boy, academic team, project leadership, and community volunteerism activities. So I found that these opportunities were very limited and were based on academics. So if you are one of the top performing learners in the class, you are probably and most likely to become a class captain or a head girl. And if you are one of the top performing in sports, then we are most probably going to become a sports captain, and there's very little opportunity for those that are not that do not fit any of these categories but do possess leadership qualities and abilities. So I found that there are participatory methods that can be used to stimulate and develop learner leadership in primary schools, which is storytelling and photo voice. So I found that storytelling and photo voice is one of the most beneficial methods that can be used to develop and stimulate learner leadership, because storytelling allows learners to tell their stories in a way that matters to them and in a way that makes them feel as though they are in charge of their own lives. So I found that learner leadership serves a valuable purpose in schooling, as it possesses the potential to develop good leaders. The main purpose for primary education is to develop the learner and provide a solid foundation for the schooling career. Then it would make perfect sense that a primary school should be the perfect place for the stimulation and development of leadership. So the relationship between higher institutions of learning, schools, and the broader community changes the lives of people. While I was doing this research, I found that the relationship between these three institutions, which is higher education institutions like Rhodes universities and basic education schools like primary schools, like the one that I was working on, and the broader community plays a very important role, because within the time periods that I was working in this primary school, I saw a great deal of development and stimulation of leadership. Leadership that will not only end within that group that I was working on, but will spread throughout the school and eventually throughout the community. Community engagement changes lives no matter the scale of the initiative. It is important that we constantly seek avenues to engage the community. So even though my project or my research wasn't big in scale and I wasn't working with all of the learners in the school, but I do believe that there was a sort of changed that I invoked within those learners, and they themselves will be able to influence others as well. And I also wanted to touch on the importance of knowledge dissemination, because on the findings that we had for my research, we as a class did a storybook on all the challenges and on our journey of research. We did the storybooks and we created a story that will be able to be read by even others that are not so familiar with academic language. But when we disseminate the knowledge that we get from these researchers, we're able to take it back to the community that we work with, and they're able to benefit from the knowledge that we produce. So in conclusion, it is imperative for individuals within academia and higher institutions of learning to actively engage with the events, affairs, and developments within their respective communities, endeavoring to bring about positive transformations. Such efforts need not to be grandiose. Even modest initiative can yield substantial impacts on the social fabric and well-being of our communities. I believe that community engagement offers an opportunity to bring about meaningful change in society. Thank you.
Thank you Zikhona, for your wonderful talk and for being so brave and coming up at the drop of a hat. I think you were like in the second session and last, and thank you for that. It was really an enlightening talk, and I think that you've given us a lot of food for thought. I'm going to open up for some questions. There we go. Go ahead.
Thank you, Zikhona. That was very informative. I've been waiting for this one. I'm just wondering, that it seems there's a very rigid sort of understanding amongst the children and maybe their schools of what leadership is and what the characters of leaders are and how to embody those. And so I think that's why in many cases you'll see that it becomes those who are popular in class who take on the leadership roles. But then they leave that kind of setting and you go through high school and then you go to university and you sort of fizzle out and you're no longer popular. And so it seems you lose those leadership qualities. Is there that kind of disconnect that you noticed, and what role can community engagement play in bridging that gap between sort of colonial understandings of leadership to reframing roles in like a modern dimension?
Just sit down while you answer.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I think there is a big misconception and injustice around leadership, especially within the schooling environment. And I think more often than not, leadership development and capacitation is often left to chance. There aren't intentional and deliberate initiatives and programs that are set out into specifically developing leadership within learners. And especially the problem that I mentioned, that there's this view of leadership as positional. So I'm only a leader when I am in a position of leadership. And that is not the case. Leadership is about influence. And leadership is about the relationship between the leader and the led. So I think going forward, there should be deliberate initiatives and programs that are set out to sort of invoke that decision-making ability, so that even those that are not considered to look a certain way or fit the image of a leader, but are able to occupy decision-making spaces and see themselves as fit enough, even though they don't fit societal standards of leaders. Thank you. Thank you.
I also have a question. So now, I just wanted to ask, I see the benefit and the immense potential in your study and how it can improve the mindset of especially young children in schools, because we forget about them and our thoughts are like their thoughts sometimes, thinking that the leaders are those people up there, but not thinking that we should be grooming them from a younger age. So how can we put that into action? What are your thoughts on, yes, you went and you did the study and you found that the kids had the potential to be leaders, but they weren't given the correct opportunities. So can you give us like some examples of how storytelling and all the other photo voice and things like that can be implemented, and how we can put it into action, just not only in that school but beyond? Okay, let's sit down again.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think, as I've said, we looked at leadership as decision making. So the ability to make a decision and an influential decision. makes you a leader, and the ability to participate in decision-making spaces makes you a leader. So I think the first step is acknowledging that as young as they are, learners and children have the ability to make decisions for themselves. So constantly involving them and inquiring how they'd like their lived realities to be. Obviously, guided decision making, and creating those safe spaces where their thoughts and ideas are being considered. Because even with storytelling, we were asking them in the activity that we did. We said, tell us about the time in your life or at school where you actually felt like a leader. And the stories that they told, even in class when a teacher was going to teach and the teacher was consulting them. So even in teaching and learning in the classroom, we as the teachers shouldn't go into the classroom thinking that I'm the adult and I know what's best, but being in constant consultation with the learners. Okay, this is what's on the table, this is the concept that is on the table, how then should I go about it? Then their ability to participate in decision making is sharpened through that. Because even in the beginning of my study, I found that it was difficult for them to participate because they believe that the adults should make the decision and as the teacher and. But the more they started participating in decision making, they even started bringing in ideas which were more beneficial. So I think it's all about starting in the everyday, in the home, in the classroom, and in deliberate initiatives.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.